Well, that's why I'm here, I suppose. Because over the last year and a half, I've 3 times woken up with no self, no centre, is the way I put it really. There's nothing I'm rotating around, there's just a gap there. The first time it lasted about 6 hours, because it was a terrible shock. Then a week later it happened again, and that lasted about a week. Then again it happened this year, each time slightly different. And when the self disappeared, it became utterly apparent to me, then, not now, that there was no way that the self could get to where I was. It's just not possible. What I am rather disappointed by is that the self, in each case, has returned. It's not the same as it was before. It doesn't have the same force. It doesn't have the same. It's not rooted. My centre isn't resolving around the self. I know it's false, but it's an intellectual knowledge rather than a practical knowledge. And it's still, quite a lot of the ego is still there. That's something that seems different.
Is there a wanting there that quite a lot of the ego shouldn't be there?
No, not exactly. It's just the second time it happened, I was really blissed out because there's nothing like the freedom of not having a self. It was lovely. My wife was also very pleased. But when that changed, it sort of changed back to a really nasty, I would put it, aspect of myself. It came back quite strongly. I was very unpleasant to her. I was very annoyed, ashamed of myself. So the old habits recurred. So I'm looking for hope, encouragement, or things that I know are not available. Yeah, but I thought I'd mention this because I've been without self. It's wonderful. Yeah. And it's liberation. But from what? It's really hard to explain. But it's come back again. So this might happen to other people as well.
So the it that's come back that you're describing is more of a normal state of being, could we call it that?
There's definitely changes, but I have a centre again. So I wish it would go away, that's basically, because it was very nice not having it. So I know you can't offer me any help with this.
Certainly not.
But clearly it's not as simple as a black and white thing. No. I just go click, and it's that, and click, and the other. So I'm waiting to see what happens, which is all I can do in the knowing that the self can go, and I'm perfectly well off without it. Better off without it.
I mean, it sounds like it is all over. Sounds like emptiness has been seen and fullness has been seen, and now what is happening is what is happening.
You mean I'm conning myself, if for a want? That has occurred to me, that it may be a falseness that I'm looking at. How can I put it? That the self isn't really back at all.
Well, of course, the self was never there, so it can't have come back.
That's the point.
But often I think what happens is let's talk about it as an event, or 2 events, possibly sometimes. The seeing of emptiness, the seeing of fullness. You know, this is very, I'm tempted to use terribly dramatic words, like it's very effulgent, it's very beautiful. I mean, that doesn't last. And then what's left after that is whatever happens. And one of the most helpful things that was said to me was, you know, that kind of effulgent, I'm going to call it a state, I know it's not a state, that total disappearance and the recognition of unconditional love, the recognition of fullness. And, you know, it was said to me that'll probably never, I can't remember the exact words, it'll probably never be like that again. And that was incredibly freeing, because there was an expectation in the mind. And so you know, we can say over and over and over and over again, this is it. Whatever arises in this is it. There is only one, it's whatever arises in this is it. But when there's been that event, the mind, which doesn't really exist, is so tempted to say, no, no, that was it. No, no, this isn't it. I don't care how many people sit at the front of rooms and say, this is it. I know, this isn't it. That was it then. And here it was very freeing for someone to say it'll probably never be like that again. Because when we say, this is it, surprisingly, we actually do mean, this is it. Whatever arises is this, and that can include bad temper. For example, it can include irritation. It can include sadness. It can, of course, include joy and love and excitement. I was reminded yesterday, I was just flicking through something, and I was reminded of this quotation by a Tibetan teacher who said, even in the greatest yogi, joy and sorrow still arise. And he could equally have said, joy and anger still arise. And I often quote, I believe it's a Korean Zen master, not sure who said, no one knows sorrow like a Zen master. In other words, something that the mind may not like to hear about this is not only, this is it, whatever arises in this is it, that includes, let me call them uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable emotions, uncomfortable thoughts. Not only is that true, but it's quite likely that all of that will arise more strongly when this is seen, because there's less resistance to it. I was talking earlier before to you about neurosis, and neurosis can create a great deal of trouble and a great many problems for us in relationships. But one of the things that neurosis is also very good at doing is kind of dampen down our feelings, including our negative feelings, using the word negative very loosely. What neurosis tends to do is it tends to make our feelings less strong, but more long-lasting. So the example I usually give of this is, instead of a flash of anger which lasts perhaps 30 seconds, we might have a whole day of irritation. When the energy release involved in the seeing of this happens, it's quite likely that at least some of that neurotic energy will disappear. And then any and all feeling may be experienced more strongly, including the feelings that we think of as uncomfortable. The mind tends not to like that. The mind, particularly if it has a story about spiritual being and so forth, is likely to very much resist that. Oh, how can there be anger? But of course there can. Of course there can, and probably stronger than before. Well, if the person, the character, the person was neurotic before, then probably stronger than before.
Yeah, it could be right, yes.
So there's the seeing of emptiness, there's the seeing of fullness. They may come at the same time, they may not. And as far as I'm concerned, that's it. There's nothing else to see. It's all over then. And then what happens is what happens.
Oh, it doesn't like that.
The mind. Yeah.
It doesn't like that at all.
Oh, that's
I can feel it, disliking it.
Yeah. And that's also what is arising. What's arising is, oh, I don't like that.
Thank you.
The thought or the idea or the view that this somehow puts an end to the possibility of the kind of experiences you were talking about is one of the biggest illusions.
I was looking for one thing and something completely different was delivered.
Yeah. It's always completely different from what I am looking for. It has to be.
And I couldn't, it was nothing to do with me. Or whatsoever.
That's partly why.
I wrote it all down while I remember. There was nothing, there was no way I could get there. It was just impossible.
Yeah.
Because it's the great state of not having the eye.
Yeah.
It's just impossible for the eye to deliver it.
Yes. when, and I hope the air quotations are being picked up, when we find what it is we think we are looking for, it just seemed that we could never have found it. Yeah. Well, it just seems to me that you're giving a very clear description of seeing the nothing, seeing the everything, the kind of tricks the mind tends to do with that. It just sounds like it's over.
Fine.
Don't forget also that in terms of the dream of happening, the dream that continues to arise, a lot will at least appear to depend on what kind of character was there before. I mean, before there might have been a very neurotic character, there might have been a very non-neurotic character before. If there's a very non-neurotic character, then all remaining neuroses may simply go poof, bang in a split second. If there's a very neurotic character, then some of that may continue. In a way, well, it doesn't matter.
Do you think there are more chances that the collapse of the character happens in a person, in a character who's, like if I'm more identified with the me that there? Like if you're less, if the identification with a person is weaker there than it is here, are the chances?
I'm not sure what it is you're saying, but I notice that I am very resistant to giving my assent to any possibility that characteristics that can be known by itself have any purchase here. We'd love to think they could. If they can be, then I can embark on some kind of purification adventure, let's call it.
Yeah, like for
whatever story this buys into. So if it's to do with mental activity, then I can embark on the spiritual adventure of calming my mental activity. And then surely there must be more chance that this would be seen by none. But it's a nice story for the mind. It's a sort of story the mind likes because the mind likes any story that puts it in control or keeps it in control. Any story that gives it something to do.
I don't really like it though, because then I feel that I have to do something about it, and I feel that I'm very bad at doing something about it,
Yeah.
because I've been doing all of my life with not much success.
Yeah.
But some speakers, I feel that I understand that from what some speakers
What's the fact that you understand from some speakers?
that if there's more neurotic energy here than here, it's more likely that the collapse of
It
the
is the most natural thing for a speaker to say. It's not correct, but it's very natural. It's the sort of story that makes sense to the mind, perfect sense to the mind. And in a way, no matter how it's put, no matter how subtly put, it is another story of self-purification. But it's crap. And it's crap in the same way that all of these stories are, and it's tempting in the same way that all of these stories are, because it brings the story back to a me who somehow can do something about their predicament. In this particular case, purify themselves of neurosis. So here's a me who's purified himself of neurosis more than that me, so the one that's purified himself of neurosis must be closer to this. It makes perfect sense, absolutely perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with it at all, except that it's wrong. That's the only thing that's wrong with it.
Except that it's crap.
Except that it's...
To
use language I would never use.
No, but I know, call a spade, it's crap.
But you said many times there is no rule, in a sense.
Yeah.
I remember the story, I don't know, probably Roger was saying one day that the one occurrence of the liberation when it happened in a very heated argument between couples, like, you know, they were just really
Why not?
enraged.
Absolutely.
It's just,
Why not?
it's just the guy, he's just
Yeah.
such a fantastic thing to,
Yeah.
so like, it brings this whole subject down to the ground, you know, really.
Yeah, because it has nothing to do with who I think I am, what I think I'm doing, or who I might be having a furious argument with. Yeah. But if I like a story, then I might like the story. Okay, you know, there's a speaker about non-duality, and they got on the bike as a person, and they cycled down a country lane, and then there was no one cycling down the country lane, there was just cycling with no one doing it. So, right, I'm going to go and buy myself a cycle. Now, you know, I chose that one out of all the different stories I could have chosen because it just popped into my head. I just remembered Sri Chinmoy. Do you remember Sri Chinmoy, the running guru? So all his followers ran because he ran. And I'm wrong with that, but it's no nearer to God than anything else. And I use the word God, obviously, advisedly, and I might add metaphorically. Neurosis is not a bar to seeing this. Freedom from neurosis isn't a guarantee of seeing it. Having blazing rows with our partner is not a bar to seeing it. I hadn't come across that anecdote before, but I like it.